On the evening of Friday, July 20th, 2018, just after sunset, London moved as it always did. Millions of people crossing the city, trains sliding beneath streets, delivery riders weaving through traffic. But that night, inside one of Battersea's residential blocks, a small discovery was about to expose a world few even knew existed. A routine police stop, a single moped rider pulled over in South London, would unravel a criminal network operating with the efficiency of a Silicon Valley startup. This is not a story of street corners or gang violence. This is a story of spreadsheets, delivery quotas, and encrypted phones. A story of two networks, one built in the shadows of luxury postcodes, the other hidden behind pink backpacks and polite customer service. Both would fall, but not before revealing just how far organized crime had evolved in one of the world's most surveilled cities. This is the true account of how British investigators tracked, dismantled, and prosecuted two of London's most sophisticated drug delivery operations, a case built on forensic patience, digital interception, and one mistake that changed everything. Before we go deeper, subscribe if you love true crime documentaries and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Suelin Marquez and Diego Duzza Aruda Reis lived the life many dreamed of. Their home sat within the gated enclave of St. George's Hill in Surrey, one of Britain's most exclusive addresses, where properties routinely sold for millions and privacy was guaranteed by high walls and security patrols. Outside their front door sat a bright orange Lamborghini, a vehicle that turned heads even in a neighborhood accustomed to wealth. Suelin, 34, and Diego, 35, presented themselves as successful professionals. Their social media showed trips to Harrods, designer shopping bags from Louis Vuitton, and restaurant meals that cost more than most people earned in a week. Over the course of a single year, investigators later calculated, the couple spent more than £50,000 on luxury goods alone, clothing, jewelry, watches, and gifts that suggested a lifestyle built on legitimate success. But there was a problem. Neither Suelin nor Diego held a formal job. No employment records, no tax filings, no business registration. To anyone looking closely, the numbers did not add up, and investigators were starting to look closely. Between 2016 and 2018, Suelin and Diego were not living off savings or family money. They were running one of London's most organized underground supply chains, a multi-million-pound operation built on encrypted phones, delivery rotas, and a product menu that read like a pharmacological index. Cocaine, MDMA, crystal methamphetamine, ketamine, heroin, cannabis, and GBL, a chemical that would later become central to the investigation. Their clients were not gang members or street-level buyers. They were professionals, partygoers, people who lived in Kensington, Chelsea, Notting Hill, and Mayfair. People who valued discretion, speed, and quality. People who could afford to pay premium prices for a service that looked and felt legitimate. And that was the key. Suelin and Diego did not operate like traditional drug dealers. They operated like entrepreneurs. Every aspect of their network was structured, documented, and optimized for efficiency. Suelin kept detailed ledgers, tracking deliveries by time, postcode, and product. Bank deposits showed a flow of more than £2.4 million over just 2 years. Cash moved through multiple accounts, spread across names and addresses that made tracing the money difficult but not impossible. Police forensic accountants would later describe the financial infrastructure as sophisticated, layered, and deliberately opaque. But behind the spreadsheets and the luxury cars was something darker. A network of people, most of them Brazilian nationals, who had come to London looking for work and found themselves embedded in a system that paid well but demanded total compliance. At the top of the hierarchy sat Henrique Bernardo Salles and Carlos Eduardo Libertadi de Silva, two trusted lieutenants who managed the day-to-day operations. Henrique handled logistics, supervising couriers, ensuring deliveries stayed on schedule, and managing the flow of product from storage units to temporary bases scattered across the city. Carlos managed the money. He organized deposits, monitored transactions, and ensured that the vast sums moving through the network did not trigger banking alerts. Below them was a layer of mid-level operators. Isabella Braga Silva functioned almost like an office dispatcher. connecting customers to couriers through encrypted messaging apps, responding to orders, and coordinating drop-offs in real time. Diego Melo dos Passos worked on logistics, arranging the movement of stock from long-term storage facilities to short-term rental apartments used as daily distribution hubs, and Bernardo Sales oversaw the couriers themselves, hiring, training, and replacing riders when needed. At the bottom of the structure were the couriers, the men and women who rode mopeds through London traffic, wearing delivery jackets and carrying thermal bags. Police later estimated that between 30 and 43 couriers were employed by the network at any given time. They were paid £15 per hour, plus a £5 bonus for each completed delivery. If they were late, they were fined. If they missed a delivery, they were fined. The system was strict and the message was clear. This was a job, not a favor. Phones were supplied by the network, routes were timed to the minute, and shifts were scheduled through WhatsApp groups with names like Anjos do Asfalto, translated as Asphalt Angels. It was not street dealing. It was a delivery service, and it ran with the discipline of a tech startup. But systems like that only stay hidden for so long. And when one courier made a mistake, the first cracks began to show. In March 2018, a Metropolitan Police unit pulled over a moped in South London. It was supposed to be a routine traffic stop, officers checking documentation looking for minor violations. The rider wore a delivery jacket, a helmet, and carried a small thermal bag strapped to the back of the bike. Nothing unusual, but when officers asked for his paperwork, something did not match. The registration number was off by a single digit, the insurance details did not align with the name he gave, and when they asked which company he worked for, his story started to shift. Officers decided to check his phone. Inside, they found WhatsApp conversations, group chats, and delivery logs that did not fit any legitimate courier work. There were lists of postcodes, times, and short-coded notes, each line representing a drop. Some messages were written in Portuguese, others used symbols instead of words. The deeper investigators went, the clearer it became that the phone was not a personal device. It was a control point, part of a wider system. The handset contained rota sheets, payment records, and encrypted conversations between names and numbers that appeared repeatedly. The user had saved addresses, all of which matched short-term rental flats in Battersea, Hoxton, Soho, and King's Cross. Within hours, detectives realized they were looking at the logistics arm of a network, and this was just one courier. For weeks, detectives built the pattern. Using cell site triangulation, they mapped the movements of every known courier phone, tracing routes between Airbnb flats and storage units. Undercover officers monitored drop-off points, recording deliveries that operated with commercial-level discipline. They began linking individuals through shared bank accounts, rental agreements, and travel records. What had started as a single traffic stop became a detailed map of a criminal supply chain stretching across London. Surveillance teams observed Suelin and Diego moving between properties, collecting stock and meeting with mid-level operators. Officers noted the regularity of their movements, the precision of their timing, and the consistency of their methods. Every detail pointed to an organization that had been running for years without detection. By July 2018, the evidence was strong enough for coordinated action. Surveillance confirmed who was where, what time stock moved, and which addresses were live. Senior officers authorized simultaneous raids. After months of quiet work, the message came through. The operation would begin. The first arrest came on July 25, 2018. Officers followed Isabella Braga Silva as she left one of the temporary flats used for sorting stock. She was stopped beside a parked car on a quiet South London street. Inside the vehicle, officers found £500,000 worth of drugs and £40,000 in cash. Ledger sheets lay on the passenger seat, marked with drop numbers and payment totals. In her phone, investigators later found full courier schedules and lists of active delivery lines. It was the first hard confirmation of how the system operated day to day. Just 5 days later, on July the 30th, the team moved on the ringleader. Suelin Marquez was arrested outside a Battersea storage unit where she had just collected new stock for redistribution. In her handbag were drugs worth £100,000 and 53 heroin wraps, packaged and ready for delivery. Her partner, Diego Duzza Aruda Reis, was not with her that morning. He had already sensed the pressure closing in. Within days, he left for Spain, but by the time he reached the coast, his name and passport details had been circulated to European authorities. He would later be arrested abroad and extradited back to Britain within months to face trial. The operation did not stop there. On August 20th, detectives traced Enrique Bernardo Sales to a flat near the Royal Docks, where he was arrested without resistance. Inside, police recovered handwritten notes, a locked case containing small scales and packaging tools. Parallel raids hit other locations across Hoxton and Suffolk, turning up fake IDs, credit card readers, and phones linked to the main courier groups. By the end of August, the network's infrastructure had been stripped apart. Police found an estimated £3 million worth of narcotics across the sites, quantities and variety that pointed to wholesale sourcing rather than small-time buying. Among the haul was more than 2,000 litres of GBL, the largest single seizure of that chemical in the United Kingdom at the time, and roughly 64,000 MDMA tablets. There were kilogram bricks of cocaine, bags of crystal methamphetamine, containers of ketamine and heroin, capped vials and pre-weighed wraps ready for sale. Investigators also seized ledgers, cash counters, digital records, and encrypted phones, every piece of evidence needed to connect the chain from couriers to leadership. It took less than 3 weeks to bring down an organization that had been running for more than 2 years. But the story was not over. What followed in court would reveal just how deep this operation ran and how much it had already earned. By the time the case reached Inner London Crown Court in March 2019, the investigation had become one of the most detailed drug prosecutions the Metropolitan Police had ever presented. The courtroom heard evidence of a network that operated like a legitimate business, with employees, shifts, rotas, and performance metrics. Judge Nigel Seed QC called it a professional, highly organized enterprise, structured with the precision of legitimate commerce. Prosecutors outlined the scale of the operation: millions in revenue, dozens of couriers, hundreds of deliveries per week. Detectives described the group as Deliveroo for Class A drugs, a system so polished it might have continued indefinitely had one courier not been stopped. When the verdicts were delivered, the sentences reflected the seriousness of the crimes. Suelin Marquez, 34, and Diego Duzza Aruda Reis, 35, each received 13 years in prison, the longest terms handed down in the case. Enrique Bernardo Sales and Carlos Eduardo Libertadi de Silva were sentenced to 8 years behind bars. Diego Melo dos Passos received 6 years and 8 months imprisonment, and Isabella Braga Silva was given 3 years and 8 months before being deported back to Brazil. The network had fallen, but while one organization was collapsing, another was already rising, and this one would take the idea of drug delivery to an entirely new level. By the start of 2020, a new network had taken over parts of London's streets. At first glance, it looked like part of the city's booming courier trade. Riders moved through traffic in bright jackets and pink rucksacks, cutting between buses and black cabs, carrying small insulated bags that looked no different from food delivery services. But these were not takeaway orders. At the center of this operation was Tiago Tomás de Lima, a 31-year-old Brazilian national who had built an underground business that turned London's nightlife into a marketplace. Working under him were 5 women: Vanessa Ananias, 29, Nayara Ribeiro, 33, Andressa Santos, 25, Naeni Fernandez Silva, 25, and Larissa Nascimento dos Reis, 24. All of them had arrived in the United Kingdom in search of work, and all became part of one of the most polished drug courier systems the Metropolitan Police had ever seen. Each woman was assigned a team number, 1 through 4, printed on the back of her pink backpack. Inside was a small wallet, color-coded with her name, holding both her cash and the day's inventory. They were expected to keep to strict delivery quotas and could be carrying up to £10,000 worth of drugs in a single shift. The system ran like clockwork. Deliveries began at 1 p.m. and continued until 10 p.m. They worked Monday to Saturday, taking Sundays off. A sign, Delima said, that the business ran smoothly enough to rest for a day. Customers were given what police later called a candy shop list, a digital catalogue with neat columns, prices and codes. Each line corresponded to one of more than 90 substances. Cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, cannabis edibles, LSD tabs, prescription sedatives, even their own pressed heart-shaped ecstasy pills. The language was professional, coded, and always polite. It was not street corner dealing. It was a service, efficient, on demand, and deliberately made to look legitimate. Every rucksack, every shift, every packet was part of a schedule that moved quietly through London's richest districts. At the wholesale level, Delima used EncroChat, the encrypted phone system that organized crime groups across Europe, believed to be untraceable. On it, he handled bulk deals, multi-kilo consignments of cocaine, MDMA, and crystal methamphetamine, all negotiated through coded usernames. In one exchange recovered by investigators, he told another user he could sell anything I touch. We will explore his EncroChat activity in detail shortly. At the retail level, things were just as controlled. Couriers handled daily deliveries through Signal, a secure messaging app configured to auto-delete conversations every 6 hours. The operation ran from two main bases in Notting Hill and South Kensington, both treated as dispatch centres. Drivers collected pre-packed rucksacks, made their rounds, and returned before closing time at 10 p.m. The efficiency was staggering. Even after police analysed seized devices, investigators found spreadsheets detailing profits and stock valuations, £90,000 a month in retail sales alone, and an inventory worth close to £2 million. Each courier was paid a daily rate of £220, a wage high enough to ensure loyalty, but low enough to keep costs under control. But what Delima did not know was that every one of those encrypted exchanges, every transaction he believed untouchable, was already being recorded. And soon the secret world he had built behind those pink rucksacks would start to unravel. When Operation Venetic began in 2020, its purpose was simple: to dismantle the encrypted criminal world that had thrived under EncroChat. What investigators did not expect was just how deep London's own networks ran. For years, organized crime groups across Europe had used EncroChat, a custom encrypted phone system that marketed itself as military-grade secure. The phones cost thousands of pounds, required subscription fees, and operated on modified hardware designed to prevent interception. Users communicated through handles and codes, believing their conversations were invisible to law enforcement. But in early 2020, European authorities, working with the French gendarmerie and Dutch police, managed to penetrate EncroChat's servers. Over the course of several months, they intercepted millions of messages from tens of thousands of users across the continent. The operation was conducted in absolute secrecy. No arrests were made until the full scope of the data had been captured and analysed. Among the thousands of intercepted accounts, one stood out to British investigators. Its activity centred around London, using codes that matched regular patterns of movement. The user's name was disguised, but the language was familiar. Through those recovered messages, a full picture of Delima's operation came into focus. Delima's EncroChat history showed bulk purchases of 10 to 15 kilograms of cocaine per deal, with at least one transaction recorded for 50 kilograms in a single order. The messages revealed negotiations over price, purity, and delivery times. But the deeper analysts went, the stranger the content became. Delima's conversations revealed more than drug dealing. There were discussions about forging fake identity documents, arranging helicopter extractions to move people out of the country, and even bribing a prison officer. The account handled everything from logistics to laundering, a window into a man who saw himself not as a dealer, but as an entrepreneur running a full-service criminal business. Once the messages were decoded, detectives started piecing together the physical evidence. Forensic teams matched the digital activity to ledgers, phones, and labeled bags seized in earlier raids. Serial numbers and notations linked directly to the same packaging found in multiple London flats. The addresses that appeared in Delima's encrypted exchanges, including the Cromwell Road and South Kensington distribution centres, as well as the storage unit in Alperton, matched the real-world sites under surveillance. It was the pattern that confirmed everything. Police took the pink backpacks as the visual identifier connecting raids across the city. They appeared in surveillance photos, seized CCTV stills, and inside the flats themselves. By the time Operation Venetic reached its height, the so-called candy shop network was no longer invisible, and with the full structure exposed, the Metropolitan Police prepared to move. On the morning of February 22, 2021, the operation that had been months in the making finally began. Across West London, teams from the Metropolitan Police Specialist Crime Unit moved in at once. 4 addresses were hit within minutes of each other. The locations had been under constant watch, and together they formed the backbone of Tiago de Lima's network. When officers entered the Cromwell Road flat, they found a scene that looked more like a warehouse than a home. Tables covered in small labeled packets stretched across the room. Each was tagged, measured, and laid out for delivery. By the time forensic teams finished counting, there were 133 separate drug exhibits. Inside those bags were quantities of cocaine, MDMA, ketamine, and 4-CMC, all portioned into street deal amounts and ready for collection. At the Alperton storage unit, detectives uncovered the heavy machinery behind the operation: a commercial pill press, a cash counter, and boxes of packaging materials stacked to the ceiling. The unit held £54,000 in cash, along with scales, sealers, and a small stash of weapons used for protection. On a computer inside, investigators discovered detailed ledgers tracking profits, stock levels, and courier schedules, documents that showed how systematically the drugs moved through the city. Across the 4 sites, the seizures told the full story of scale. Police recovered 4 kilograms of cocaine, 8 kilograms of MDMA, 7 kilograms of methamphetamine, 3 kilograms of amphetamine, 1 kilogram of 4-CMC, 18 kilograms of cannabis, along with 2,493 doses of LSD, bags of psilocybin mushrooms, cannabis edibles, prescription drugs, and nearly £2 million worth of narcotics in total. When the dust settled, detectives stood inside what was left of the network's core, a dismantled infrastructure that had once operated like a business built on speed, secrecy, and precision. As Detective Constable James Hughes of the Specialist Crime Unit said afterwards, "Every sale on those mopeds funded violence on our streets. The work we've done here shows exactly where that money leads, and why we'll keep taking these networks apart." Within hours, the candy shop operation was over, but for those who had built it, the reckoning was still to come. By the time the case reached Southwark Crown Court, the story of the so-called Charlie's Angels gang had already become one of the most striking examples of organized drug delivery in Britain. Judge Gregory Perrins described the operation as a professional, highly organized criminal network, supplying a vast array of drugs on a vast scale. The courtroom listened as prosecutors outlined the details we have already covered: the pink backpacks, the delivery quotas, the encrypted phones, and the EncroChat evidence that had unlocked everything. As the officers involved reflected on the outcome, one final statement summed up the case. It came from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime Unit. They wore pink backpacks, but what they carried destroyed lives. When the sentences were read, there was no mistaking the scale of accountability. Tiago Tomas de Lima, aged 31, was sentenced to 18 years in prison. His second-in-command, Vanessa Ananias, received 6 years. The 3 core couriers, Nayara Ribeiro, Andressa Santos, and Nayeni Fernandez Silva, were each given 4.5 years. Finally, Larissa Nascimento dos Reis, the gang's bookkeeper who tracked profits and maintained earnings spreadsheets, was sentenced to 2 years and 3 months. In total, the sentences amounted to 37.5 years of imprisonment, a complete dismantling of a network that had once moved freely through London streets. But there was one more story connected to this world, a story that began not in London, but on a flight from Brazil, a story that showed just how far desperation could push someone, and how close one man came to dying for a debt he could never repay. It was Christmas Eve, 2020, when Luan Irving dos Santos Monteiro stepped off an overnight flight from São Paulo into Heathrow Terminal 2. He looked like any other passenger, tired, carrying a small bag, eager to clear customs and disappear into the city. But something about his behavior caught the attention of border force officers. He hesitated when questioned. His hands trembled slightly, and his answers about his stay in London did not quite line up. Monteiro was a 30-year-old student from Macapá, Brazil, who had traveled nearly 6,000 miles across the Atlantic. When officers escorted him for a routine baggage inspection, they found nothing unusual. No drugs, no hidden compartments, no signs of smuggling. It was only after he was taken for a medical scan that the real story surfaced. The X-ray revealed more than 100 capsule-shaped objects inside his stomach, later counted as 101 packages of cocaine, weighing a total of 1.2 kilograms, with a street value of nearly £98,000. Each capsule had been swallowed whole before his flight, tightly wrapped and sealed to withstand the 11-hour journey from Brazil to the United Kingdom. One rupture would have killed him within minutes. When questioned, Monteiro finally explained why he had risked his life. Before the pandemic, he had worked as a sex worker in Brazil. When COVID-19 restrictions hit, the work disappeared almost overnight. He was left without income, without clients, and trapped in a cycle of debt to a local drug supplier. That debt, around £2,000, roughly 15,000 Brazilian reais, grew as interest mounted. The same men who had lent him money began to threaten him, his mother, and his siblings. Monteiro told investigators that he was HIV positive and had turned to smuggling out of desperation. He believed the job would be a one-time payment, a way to clear his debt and start again. But once he swallowed the first capsule, there was no turning back. For more than 10 hours in the air, he sat upright in his seat, afraid to eat, drink, or move too suddenly, knowing that a single tear in the wrapping could burst open and poison him instantly. Monteiro was detained on December 24, 2020, and taken into custody at Heathrow. On Christmas Day, he was formally charged with attempting to import Class A drugs. The following Boxing Day, he pleaded guilty before Uxbridge Magistrates Court, admitting to swallowing the cocaine as part of a smuggling arrangement. Just over a month later, on January 28, 2021, the case was heard at Isleworth Crown Court. Prosecutors detailed his journey, the medical evidence, and the circumstances that led him to risk his life. Judge Edward Connell described it as a crime of desperation, but part of a violent global chain. Monteiro was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in prison, half to be served in custody before deportation. His case illustrated the human cost behind the networks we have explored, the pressure, the violence, and the exploitation that fueled a system built on luxury lifestyles and encrypted phones. What do these cases tell us about the evolution of organized crime in the 21st century? They show that the old models, street corners, gang territories, violent enforcement, are being replaced by something quieter, more efficient, and harder to detect. These were not criminal enterprises in the traditional sense. They were businesses, complete with customer service, delivery guarantees, and profit margins. They exploited the same technologies that power legitimate commerce, encrypted messaging, gig economy labor, short-term rentals, and turned them into tools for large-scale drug distribution. The networks we have examined operated across 2 distinct eras. Suelin Marquez and Diego Duzza Aruda Reis built their empire before encryption became mainstream, relying on discipline, hierarchy, and careful record-keeping. Tiago Tomas de Lima operated in the EncroChat era, believing his communications were invisible, only to have that security shattered by international law enforcement cooperation. Both networks fell, but for different reasons. The first was undone by a single traffic stop and months of patient surveillance. The second was dismantled by a technological breakthrough that exposed millions of messages across Europe. And Luan Monteiro's story reminds us that behind every transaction, every delivery, every encrypted message, there are real people, some profiting, some exploiting, and some simply trying to survive. The legacy of these cases is complex. On one hand, they represent significant victories for British law enforcement, proof that even the most sophisticated criminal operations can be dismantled through intelligence-led policing, forensic analysis, and international cooperation. On the other hand, they raise difficult questions. How do we address the demand that makes these networks profitable? How do we protect vulnerable individuals like Montero from being exploited by transnational criminal organizations? And how do we adapt our legal and technological systems to keep pace with criminals who constantly evolve their methods? The sentences handed down in these cases, totaling more than 60 years of imprisonment across both networks, send a clear message. But the market remains. The postcodes that fueled these operations, Kensington, Chelsea, Notting Hill, Mayfair, still exist. The demand for fast, discreet, high-quality drug delivery has not disappeared. And as long as that demand persists, someone will find a way to meet it. The pink backpacks are gone, but the system that created them is not. This is not a story with a neat ending. It is a snapshot of a moment in the ongoing battle between law enforcement and organized crime. A battle fought not with guns or violence, but with data surveillance and the relentless work of investigators who refuse to stop until the network falls.